it is now, that Bechuanaland, small country though it may be, has a role to play in Southern Africa and in the unnecessary conflict between black and white. The proposals I have put forward aim at establishing a non-racial society in which each individual will have an equal right of expression and of opportunity, no matter what his race or color. It will be an essential democratic society in which men and women of different colors will live together.
Seretse Khama was a prominent figure in the anti-apartheid movement and was instrumental in bringing about independence for Botswana. He was a man of great passion, wisdom, and perseverance who made a significant impact on Botswana and the rest of the world. Seretse Khama was born on July 1, 1921 in Seretse. He was born into a prominent royal family, the Bamangwato tribe, one of the major tribes in Botswana, in what was then the Bechuanaland Protectorate under British colonial rule. Seretse was the son of Queen Tebogo and Seretse Khama II, the paramount chief of the Bamangwato clan, and the grandson of Khama III, their king. The name Seretse means the clay that binds, and Khama was raised with the expectation that he would become a king like his father. Seretse's father, Seretse Khama II, died in 1925 when Seretse was just 4 years old. After Seretse Khama's death, Seretse became the heir apparent to the chieftaincy. His uncle, Seretse Khama, who was a prominent figure in the anti-apartheid movement, became Seretse's guardian and acting chief of the Bamangwato tribe, ruling on behalf of the young Seretse. Seretse Khama was instrumental in Seretse's upbringing, ensuring he received a good education. Seretse attended a local mission school in Seretse before being sent to South Africa for secondary education, where he enrolled in 2 prestigious educational institutions, Lovedale and Tiger Kloof, the latter which was known for educating future African leaders. Seretse then sent Seretse to Fort Hare University in South Africa in the Eastern Cape, where he graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree in 1944. At Fort Hare, Khama was known as a gifted debater, and came into contact with many other students like Robert Mugabe and Kenneth Kaunda, who would also go on to lead their countries to independence. Like many of his peers, Khama wanted to pursue legal studies, and in 1945 he was sent to the United Kingdom for further studies. He studied law at Balliol College in Oxford, and continued his legal education at the Inner Temple in London, where he was admitted on October 14, 1946. This education was intended to prepare him for leadership and to equip him with the knowledge necessary to navigate the complexities of colonial rule. In 1947, while he was in London, living near Marble Arch and studying for his bar examinations, Seretse met Ruth Williams, a clerk in the Claims Department of Lloyd's of London. Born in Blackheath, South London, the daughter of a retired Indian Army officer, she had served in the Women's Auxiliary Air Force during the Second World War, and was apparently an independent-minded woman her early 20s when she met Seretse. They were introduced at a London Missionary Society dance by Ruth's sister, Muriel Williams Sanderson, who was married to a South African and had a keen interest in African affairs. Although their initial meeting was not a success, their shared enthusiasm for jazz resulted in a blossoming romance, and in September 1948, Seretse sent an airmail letter to his uncle, Seretse, announcing that he planned to marry Ruth on October 2. Seretse expressed his outrage at the proposal and pressed the London Missionary Society to intervene to prevent the marriage, but in a move of defiance, Seretse brought the planned wedding date forward. However, the vicar of St. George's in Campden Hill, who had agreed to conduct the marriage ceremony, lost his nerve in the face of mounting opposition and referred them to the Bishop of London, who was officiating at an ordination ceremony at St. Mary Abbots in Kensington. The couple sat through the ordination service only to be told that the bishop was not prepared to allow the marriage to take place in church without the approval of the British government. Both knew that this was unlikely to be forthcoming. Meanwhile, Ruth had become estranged from her father, who thoroughly disapproved of the relationship. She was also informed by her employers that in the event of her marriage, she must choose between a transfer to their New York office or being terminated. The British government summoned Seretse to London for discussions, seemingly to resolve the matter, but the real intent was to delay and discourage the marriage. Nevertheless, on September 29, 1948, in the face of all opposition, Seretse Khama married Ruth Williams at Kensington Registry Office. The diplomatic storm was just beginning. Seretse was summoned back to Bechuanaland by Tshisekedi, arriving there on October 22, 1948. He faced a 4-day grilling at the full tribal assembly known as a Kotla meeting, from 15th to November 19th, for breaking tribal custom and disregarding the regent's command. The tribe at this first meeting, with almost one voice, condemned the marriage and resolved that all steps should be taken to prevent Seretse's white wife from entering the Bamangwato reserve. However, Seretse was adamant that he would not return to the reserve without his wife, and suspicions began to arise among the people that Tshisekedi was plotting to banish Seretse and to claim the chieftaincy for himself. At a second Kotla meeting in December, a significant number of tribesmen withdrew their objection to the marriage and demanded a guarantee that Seretse would be allowed to return freely to his tribal lands if he went back to England to pursue his legal studies. When Seretse returned from London to the Protectorate in June 1949, he made it clear that he would leave permanently if his wife were not allowed to join him, and at a third Kotla meeting agreed to accept him as their chief on any terms. On August 20th, Ruth Khama arrived in Seretse to jubilation, with the people of Seretse popularly accepting the young king and his new wife. In this unexpected turn of events, Tshisekedi found his authority overthrown by the vast majority of the tribe which he had ruled with a firm hand for over 20 years. In a bid to regain support, he threatened to leave his people and settle in voluntary exile in the Botswana reserve. His bluff was called, and Tshisekedi left his homeland unopposed, accompanied by a small band of loyal followers. However, Seretse's future as chief was far from secure. The British government had not yet recognized him, and at the end of October 1949, the Union of South Africa declared him and his wife as prohibited immigrants. If they set foot in Mafeking, the headquarters of the Bechuanaland Protectorate, which was situated over the border in South Africa, they would be arrested. From the onset, the white governments of the Union of South Africa and Southern Rhodesia were deeply concerned about Seretse Khama's interracial marriage to Ruth Williams, and the potential British recognition of Seretse as chief. The Prime Minister of Southern Rhodesia warned British High Commissioner Sir Evelyn Baring that extreme nationalists might push for a republic outside the Commonwealth if Britain recognized Seretse. The Prime Minister of South Africa supported this stance, monitoring the situation closely. The 1909 South Africa Act allowed the Union to claim neighboring tribal territories, and the Secretary of State for Commonwealth Relations highlighted the risk of increased demands for such transfers if the Union's views were ignored. He even raised the possibility of an armed incursion into Bechuanaland if Seretse was recognized while tensions were high. This concern was underscored by the political climate in South Africa, where Prime Minister Dr. Malan's National Party had just come to power on an apartheid platform. In this context, the British government faced a dilemma. A judicial inquiry in Bechuanaland was arranged to assess Seretse's suitability as chief, which concluded in December 1949. The inquiry had mixed findings. It noted that if the tribe had forgiven Seretse for not following native customs in his marriage, the British should not punish him for it. Seretse was seen as an intelligent, educated man, assimilated to British manners and thoughts. However, the inquiry also highlighted that his marriage had soured relations with neighboring countries, crucial for the well-being of the Bamangwato and the Protectorate. They concluded that despite his qualifications, Seretse could not be deemed fit to rule due to the diplomatic fallout of his marriage, stating that without the marriage, his prospects as chief were as bright as any African they had encountered. Seretse could not be recognized as chief and was recalled to London in 1950. He cabled his wife from the British capital stating, "Tribe and myself tricked by British government, I am banned from whole protectorate." Ruth remained in Bechuanaland for a while afterwards, and Seretse was permitted to join her there for the birth of their first child. They both returned to London and Ruth became reconciled with her father. In 1952, Seretse was excluded permanently from the chieftainship and was required to live outside his native country. Ironically, Seretse's uncle Tshisekedi, who was still living in the Botswana Reserve, was also banned from the Bamangwato Reserve, whilst the British arranged for a caretaker government incorporating a native authority. It must have seemed to Seretse that he would never return to his native land. The couple lived in London and other parts of the UK during this period and even welcomed their second child, Ian. However, his cause was not forgotten either in London or in Africa. The couple garnered support from anti-colonial movements and sympathetic politicians in the UK who kept the issue alive in the British Parliament. During their exile, the extensive international press coverage of the treatment of Seretse and Ruth Khama by successive British governments resulted in widespread protests from human rights and other humanitarian groupings, highlighting the injustices of colonial rule and the absurdity of racial discrimination. In 1956, the Bamangwato cabled the Queen to ask for the return of their chief, and after both Seretse and Tshisekedi had signed undertakings renouncing the chieftainship for themselves and their heirs, agreeing to live in harmony with each other, they were allowed to return home as private citizens.
I have given up the chieftainship, and that my children will not succeed. I am allowed to play a part in politics if I pass away.
After a few years living as a cattle rancher, Seretse was motivated to enter politics. From 1957 to 1962, Seretse Khama was involved in the reform of local and territorial government, leading to the establishment of a legislative council as they took key steps towards decolonization. In November 1961, Seretse Khama and other delegates to the African Advisory Council founded the Bechuanaland Democratic Party in Lobotse. Within the next few months, Masire and Khama drafted a party constitution, and then held the party's first public meeting in Gaborone on February 28, 1962. With its call for reform leading to a non-racial independent republic, the BDP was able to draw overwhelming support. Khama's efforts in exile gave him increased credibility with an independence-minded electorate as the BDP won the first universal franchise elections in March 1965, allowing Seretse Khama to become the first prime minister of a self-governing Bechuanaland protectorate. Almost a year later, on September 20, 1966, Khama received a knighthood from Queen Elizabeth II, just 10 days before Botswana gained its independence.
Seretse Khama ke ikana gore ka boammaaruri le tlhoafalo ke tla dira ditiro tsa me le ditshwanelo mo maemong a kwa godimo ke le motlotlomeledi wa puso ya Botswana le gore ke tla tlamela kgolagano ya Botswana mme ke bo ke tshegetsa melao le gone ke tla dirisa dinonofo tsa me go direla le go tlhokomela batho ba Botswana.
On September 30, 1966, Botswana gained its independence from British colonial rule, with Khama being elected as the country's first president. Khama's vision for Botswana was to create a prosperous and democratic country where all citizens were treated fairly. At the time of its independence, Botswana was one of the world's poorest countries, with minimal infrastructure and limited access to education. The country was greatly indebted to Britain and surrounded by white-ruled states. It was therefore widely but falsely assumed that the country had no option but to sell out to its neighbors. However, Khama refused to submit to their control, and under Khama's leadership, the country experienced rapid economic growth. Seretse Khama focused on building an export-oriented economy based on beef processing and mining copper and diamonds. The government reinvested most of the revenue from mining in infrastructure, healthcare, and education, leading to further economic development and widespread prosperity in both rural and urban areas.
We can only give them assistance, support. But if our country wishes to be liberated, it is they who have to play an important part. Nevertheless, countries are willing to give them as much help as they possibly can. A crime in South Africa, from a political point of view, is not necessarily a crime in this country. And genuine political refugees have our sympathy.
In addition to his domestic achievements, Seretse Khama envisioned a peaceful, democratic, and prosperous post-colonial Southern Africa. As Botswana progressed, Khama turned his attention to foreign policy. He formed key alliances with other Fort Hare University alumni, Presidents Konda of Zambia and Nyerere of Tanzania, becoming a prominent Pan-African statesman. In his final decade, he played significant roles in negotiating the end of the Rhodesian Civil War and the subsequent independence of Zimbabwe in March 1980. In 1969, Seretse Khama addressed the United Nations General Assembly, emphasizing the importance of aid to build a prosperous, non-racial democracy in Botswana. He argued that Botswana's success would challenge South Africa's apartheid policies, showing the contrast between economic growth and racial discrimination. In 1978, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees awarded Seretse the Nansen Award for aiding tens of thousands of refugees escaping racial oppression. Despite not providing bases for armed liberation movements, Botswana endured cross-border attacks from neighboring security forces aiming to intimidate and eliminate political opponents. Seretse contributed to the creation of the Southern African Development Coordination Conference, Southern Africa's intergovernmental organization, which is now known as the Southern African Development Community. He also established the Botswana Defense Force to protect the nation's borders and refugees from regional conflicts. Khama was also known for his passion for wildlife. He dedicated his life to protecting the natural beauty of Botswana and preserving its wildlife. He was instrumental in creating the Mon Nature Reserve, which became a sanctuary for iconic African wildlife and a beacon for wildlife conservation. In his later years, Khama's health deteriorated due to heart and kidney ailments, as well as diabetes. It was an open secret that he received regular medical treatment in London, and on June 23, 1980, he flew to London with his wife Ruth and Dr. Merriweather for further tests. It was initially reported as a routine checkup, however those close to him feared he might not return alive. In London, it was publicly disclosed that Seretse was suffering from terminal abdominal cancer, which had spread from his pancreas to his liver, worsening his heart and kidney conditions. Dr. Merriweather insisted that Seretse be brought back to Botswana to die, rather than remaining in London like his uncle Tsakidi, who died from cancer while in Britain. Arrangements were made with Britain's Foreign and Commonwealth Office for Khama to be flown home in a Royal Air Force jet. Khama returned to Gaborone on June 30, 1980. The nation was kept informed of his condition, and various religious groups held prayers for him. Public celebrations were cancelled in his honor, and a large open-air service was held on July 6 to pray for his recovery. Despite further consultations with specialists in Johannesburg and Washington, D.C., it was confirmed that there was no hope for recovery. Seretse's condition briefly improved but continued to deteriorate. After fighting valiantly in his final days, Seretse Khama passed away on July 13, 1980, at the State House in Gaborone, with Ruth Khama by his side. He was mourned by thousands, and his body lay in state in Gaborone before being buried in the Royal Cemetery on a hill in Seretse. He served a total of 4 presidential terms before his untimely death in 1980 at the age of 59. He left Botswana an increasingly democratic and prosperous country with a significant role in the politics of Southern Africa. Seretse Khama remains a popular figure in his native country, and is remembered as a very caring, considerate and softly spoken gentleman. Ruth, a keen charity worker, continued to live in Botswana and undertook a wide range of charitable duties, including acting as president of the Botswana Red Cross. Known to the population as Lady Ruth, she was a familiar figure in her adopted country, considering herself a Motswana, or native citizen of Botswana, until her death on May 22, 2002. A book by Michael Dutfield titled A Marriage of Inconvenience, The Persecution of Ruth and Seretse Khama was published in 1990, and in 2016, the story of Seretse and Ruth's epic love story was depicted in a movie titled A United Kingdom. The couple had 4 children in total. Jacqueline, the oldest and only female, the twin brothers, Andrew and Sakidi, and their oldest son Ian, who went on to serve 2 terms as the president of Botswana. Sir Seretse Khama was a remarkable leader, renowned for his wisdom, passion, and perseverance. His vision for a just and democratic society, coupled with his commitment to economic development and wildlife preservation, left a lasting impact on Botswana and the rest of the world. Today, his legacy continues to inspire people to work towards a better future for themselves and their communities.
I must hasten to caution, however, that we are still very far from the end of the struggle. Our neighbors and friends in Namibia and South Africa are still to experience political independence and freedom from minorities' racist regimes before they can enjoy the freedom and the right of self-determination which our peoples presently enjoy. Southern Africa cannot claim to have achieved total liberation. The struggle must therefore continue until all of us in this region can freely enjoy all the rights to which we are entitled and are able to determine our future and well-being.
We'll need a lot of assistance, particularly from the United Kingdom and from other more friendly disposed countries, and by our own efforts, particularly by extensive and prospecting for minerals and so on, and the improvement of the cattle industry and as well as agriculture.
When you say well-disposed countries, would you take aid from the Eastern Bloc as well as from the West?
The devil you know is better than the devil you don't know.